Sue, tell us about what you do as a producer.
Look, producing is such a nebulous term and used so extensively, from executive producer and line producer and associate producer and creative producer, and there's a whole range of descriptions that go with it. And I understand why people don't really know what it means some of the time. But really, as a producer, you are the overall project manager and often the creative driver, depending on where the idea has come from. But it means that you have to take full responsibility from often the kernel of an idea right through to the very end of the delivery of that idea, right through to reporting on the financiers to that project, maybe 10 or 15 years on, when everybody else who's been involved in the project has moved on, but you've still got it, it's still your baby. So it is a bit like having a child. You never quite know how it's going to turn out, but you still have to love it, and you still have to find ways to keep that kind of enthusiasm up across what it will be enormous numbers of challenges in never getting it made. Because in reality, you might only get 10% of what you develop ultimately gets made. But that sense of a producer being someone who has a much more of a creative involvement, I think a lot of people realise. A lot of people think producing is actually just putting the nuts and bolts together for a production. That's aspects of line producing and production management, certainly, but it's not producing. And it's really important that people understand the difference.
Did you ever dream way back in the beginning of your career that you'd be producing a film that played as the closing film at the Cannes Film Festival? Yeah.
Oh, of course, it was every one of my dreams was that. No, clearly not. You don't really know. Every time you start off in something, you have no idea where it's going to end up. And that particular project was something that I started, probably 5 or 6 years before it ever got made. I started as developing it myself. I'd taken an option on a book, an Australian book, so I had no concept that it was going to be of interest to a French director. And then just out of the blue, this sort of French director kind of contacted me via her producer and said, we see you've got the rights to that book. Are you interested in working with me effectively? So it kind of came out of the blue, and saw the work that she'd done. So that French connection kind of started really just by the internet, really, to be perfectly honest. And then actually getting into Cannes was just an amazing experience, because strangely it's actually even harder getting into Cannes when you're with a French company than when you are with an Australian one, in a sense, because there's always sort of a vacancy for an Australian film. But when you actually are in France, they make 230 films a year, which is about 10 times more than ever get made in Australia. So getting those slots is even tougher. But it was an amazing experience, because it's the world stage. We had Charlotte Gainsbourg in the lead, who in France is a bit like having Cate Blanchett. She is part of the French royalty when it comes to the I suppose the celebrity acting, or whatever you want to call it, world. And so incredibly highly regarded. So everywhere you went with her, it was just like, stacks and stacks of fans and all of that. It was a weird and surreal experience. And we were the closing night film. And that meant that, we had everybody there, and the jury was there, and they all came to the after party, and it was fun, it was, and you see it in the best cinema in the world, the Lumiere cinema in Cannes is just a magnificent cinema. It has several thousand seats. It's a huge screen, a magnificent sort of sound system, and it's a real buzz when you're there. And the French, when they like a film, they really let you know about it. Of course, when they don't like a film, they really let you know about it too. But we had an amazing standing ovation, and it's just a real buzz on a project that took a lot of time and effort for all sorts of reasons to get there. So it was a great reward.
Did you have any cultural issues as far as the director being French?
Look, it's an interest. There is definitely some cultural differences in the sense that the French, by and large, are quite organic in their approach to everything, particularly in the arts. That they don't like to be too organised. They like the opportunity for spontaneity, for things to not go quite as everything's been planned. And of course, when you work in the film industry, you are constantly having to be ruthless in your planning. So finding that kind of interesting place between us was a big difference. And some of the roles are a little bit different between the French system and the Australian system. Some of, the first AD is a different kind of role, and continuity is a different kind of role. So they took a little bit of getting used to. But it was a great experience to work in that kind of situation, and a great experience having a French co-producer who was actually an Israeli co-producer as well, and just that range of experience that they were able to bring to it was, just something you don't think about, but incredibly valuable.
You have a degree in anthropology. Does that mean you have a head start on understanding humans and relationships?
I hope so. I'm not sure. When I started studying anthropology, I certainly didn't think that was my way into the film industry. I studied anthropology because I couldn't decide. Excuse me. I studied anthropology because I couldn't decide what I really wanted to do, and I had a science background and an arts background at school. I did sort of biology, and I also did English. So I kind of couldn't make up my mind. And the thing about anthropology was it meant I could do a bit of both, and in many respects, because it's actually about the study of man, and the human condition. And so, in that sense, it's a great asset. Yeah.
I just want to talk about the relationships you have with your crew, and particularly the director. What's the key to a happy crew, do you think?
Whether it's a happy crew or an effective crew are not necessarily the same thing. Look, as everything, it comes down to communication, really. Relationship with the director can vary immensely according to the skill sets of the director. Because most people get into directing from somewhere. Might be a writer, or they might be an actor, or they might be an editor, or they might be a cinematographer, or they all often come in from different places, or they might even be a producer. So knowing as much as you can about that director, and how you're going to support the areas that they might not have a lot of strengths is kind of a critical thing in terms of that relationship. And you very quickly work out, as time's gone on, and I've worked with directors from all those different backgrounds, I now know, okay, warning sign, they might not be able to communicate with actors, or warning sign, they have no idea how to get the coverage. So you just kind of start to fill those gaps for them, because there's no reason why everyone's going to be able to do all of the things that are required as a director.
So how important do you think it is to leave room for input from your team?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, it is such a collaborative process, filmmaking. I can't imagine there's any other art form, and it is an art form, that requires as many different skill sets, from technical and creative and performance and music, and you just name it, they're all in there, design. And so making sure that those people have a voice is the reason why you want all of their skill sets, but you have to make sure that it doesn't make you go down paths that are not going to work for the big picture, and that's always a very difficult balancing act. That certainly as a producer and a director, you need to be thinking about the big picture, and sometimes those very particular skill sets are just looking at it from their perspective.
As a team leader, then, you are managing expectations essentially, aren't you?
Yes, you're managing a lot of expectations at all ends of the spectrum. Yeah, and managing those expectations is, as much as anything, about being as honest as you can be with the information that you have. I think people really respond to that. I think keeping people in the dark doesn't help. But yeah, I mean, expectations are always going to be tricky, because you never really know what you're getting into until you get to the other end. Then you know what you've got into. but the process of getting there is a unique exercise.
Has there ever been a situation where the movie you thought you were producing starts looking like something else?
I think it's a question of, has there ever been a movie where it has stayed the same? The answer is no. I mean, everything is a process of evolution, and it's an organic process. And there's a kind of an expression that says, you write a movie 3 times, you write it on the page, you write it in production, and you write it in the edit suite, and that's absolutely true. So it's always going to be changing from what your original expectations were, because there are so many factors which are going to dictate those changes, which you have no control over. I know that there is never a single time that you look at that first assembly, which is basically all of the scenes put together as based on the script, and that's the first thing you look at in the edit suite, and it's always devastatingly bad. And it's just, and you kind of go, oh my God, that's actually what we've got. But that's because, it's not that the script was bad, it's just that all of the things that had to come together, you didn't get the actors that you wanted or the performance that you wanted, or in actual fact, the coverage on the day. There's a whole myriad of reasons as to why you don't get what you were expecting to get. But then you look at it at assembly stage, and you look at it with the director and with the editor, and then you kind of go, okay, well, what is the story we're going to tell? And it might be different, and it will be a bit different because you've got these new things, some of which are terribly exciting. You kind of go, oh, I never really thought that was going to be, that was going to work out like that. And then other things are not at all what you're expecting, and you feel like you've lost the best scenes of the film somehow. But you do often, that's the challenge. You actually then go, okay, well, how can we tell the story to bring it back? And it's for me as a filmmaker, that's the most exciting phase, is the edit, because you are dealing with the actuals. You're dealing with what you've got, not what you thought you might get. And it brings all of your skills to the fore to try and find a solution.
Does that mean, is it juggling what you've got or reshooting some of the scenes again?
Oh, look, unfortunately in Australia we never have enough money to reshoot, and usually you wouldn't even have access sometimes to the performers or whatever if it's going to be key scenes. So often, frequently you've got actors who are working all over the world and directors who can't come back and a whole range of other things. So it's rare that you get a chance to reshoot. It's more re-looking at the story and trying to sort of shape it a little bit to what you have.
It's important for you. Though it's important for your team to respect you most of all, how important is it to be liked as a producer?
That's a really hard question for me to answer. Look, it's important that you don't make your decisions based on being liked. Put it like that. I think everybody wants to be liked. That's just a human nature. And you don't want people to not want to work with you. So you obviously need to find a way to try and get the outcome that you want without losing what is often friendships, really, because when you're making a film you're often under quite stressful circumstances, so you do find that you do have bonds with people. It's a bit like going away at boarding school or something, or going away on a school camp. You're just seeing people in slightly different environment, away from their normal day-to-day activities sometimes, and so it's quite a privilege in that sense to get to know people in a very in-depth way. But you do have to be making certain that you are making decisions based on the best thing for the project, and that means you can't just make decisions just to be liked. You hope that you treat people with respect so that they like you for your honesty and truthfulness, but I think it's a serious mistake to go, I just have to be liked above all else. You can't do the job.
So that comes down to some of you've worked with some great directors. Are there specific qualities that the best directors share, do you think?
Look, it gets back down to that communication thing. Really good directors are people who do collaborate, who do listen, who do realise that they don't have all of the answers to everything, and that's why it's really important that they have a good team of people around them. But equally well, really good directors know when they have a vision for something and that opinion might not fit within that vision, and that if they become too malleable, if you like, and veer away from that vision, then they really lose what it is they're trying to say. And so I think the best directors are ones who do both. They have a vision, they have a clear vision, they know when they've got something, and they know when to say cut. They don't have to just keep shooting and shooting. But at the same time, they also that they're also, I don't know, prepared to say, okay, I don't have all the answers. Yeah.
This is out of left field, a question that I haven't put in the list, but Morgan Freeman once said, the job of the director was hiring me. He's done his job, now he just leaves it up to me and I will do my job. Do you think that's a fair comment?
I think getting your casting right is probably 70% of the way of getting to a great film. I think obviously you need a good script, but I've seen, not necessarily good scripts really make good films. And equally well, I've seen brilliant scripts go the other way. So it is a combination of a number of factors, but certainly having an authentic and believable performance is at the core of so much good filmmaking. And so if you can get that casting right, then from a directing point of view, it makes life so much easier. And I certainly know, in terms of the director I've worked with, who was the French director who had come in as predominantly working in documentary, so didn't really have a great deal of experience in dealing with actors. She'd done one film with actors, but most of her experience with documentary. But so for her, that casting process was absolutely essential because she actually found it quite difficult to find a way to talk to actors to get performance, particularly as it was her second language, speaking in English. Whereas I've worked with two well-known directors who are actors by nature, but actors by training, should I say, and that's the one area I always felt really comfortable, that they have a natural ability to communicate with actors. And so, I didn't ever have to worry about that, but where they were less strong sometimes was in finding a cinematic approach to the material, and knowing whether or not they've got the coverage and all those sorts of things, because they don't actually edit in their head. So it ranges a lot in terms of what makes a good director, I think.
What are the key things that someone should know in order to be successful in the producing side of filmmaking, do you think?
I think probably the most important thing is to recognise that every film is unique, and that it's a prototype. It will never ever get made again, even if you make a second version or a third version or a fourth version. It's never going to be the same because the circumstances in which it gets shot, the script's different, the actors are different. All of these factors mean that you are creating a prototype. So you have to be really careful that you don't get too arrogant to think you know all of the answers, because 9 times out of 10 you're facing a problem you've actually never faced before. As time goes on, you probably face less original problems, but they're still going to be there.
What sort of things can someone do to stay on top of their game, do you think?
Look, the only thing to do to stay on top of your game is to keep making stuff. It is that sense of just keep practicing, keep doing stuff, and I don't think there's any excuse not to. In today's world, I think years ago, where if you wanted to make something on film, it was an expensive exercise. You did need money and resources to do it. But now, you can shoot something on a mobile phone. There is nothing stopping you from going away and making a film, even if you don't even want to show it to anybody. It doesn't matter. You're still going through the process of finding out how to tell a story, learning how to communicate with people, sitting in the edit suite to work out, how do you turn what you've got into something. So it is about making sure you just keep making stuff. Too many people just think, I can't do it until I get all the finance together, and I can't do it until I have everything in place. And then there's 3 years go by, 4 years go by, 5 years go by, and then they've not made anything, and they're completely out of touch with everything that's going on. So that's the critical thing. From a producing point of view, I think it's really essential that you need to know a little bit about everything. It's like you don't really get on top of your game for about 10 or 15 years in doing it, because there's so much to learn. But you don't have to be a great writer, but you do have to be able to recognise good writing. You don't have to be a director, but you do have to be able to recognise it. You don't have to be an actor. All those things, but you still need to be across all of those things. And increasingly now, you need to be able to talk with lawyers. You need to be able to talk with agents around the world. You need to be able to talk with financiers. You need to be able to talk with broadcasters. It's just a range of skill sets that will challenge anybody, and that's why it's not going to happen overnight.
So finally, what advice can you give from your personal experiences to future hopefuls trying to get into the film industry?
Oh, look, I'm always loath to give too much advice because everybody's circumstances are different. I think the one piece of advice I can only ever go for myself is that is to follow your instinct, follow your gut instinct. It's all of my regrets, and they're not that many, but all of them have been when I've actually gone against my instinct, and sort of taken advice from people who may not know as much as I do in some circumstances. So I think that, to me, is the best thing to say. Even if you're not going to be right, you're not going to be right all the time. No one's going to be right all the time. But at least if you're following your ideas and your instinct, then you've only got yourself to blame if it doesn't work out. I think there's always a great sense of regret when you go, oh, damn it, I knew that. I don't know why I did that, So I think that sense of, trusting your own instincts is a good place to be.
Thank you, Sue.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.